Dark times come when good men do nothing. Peace comes when good men make a radical choice. Has anybody heard the term Hitler's Pope? Admiral Canaris tells the SS, Joey Ox is an undercover agent for us at the Vatican. I told them to call the guard, to have you arrested, and then shot. And they want the Pope to help them kill Hitler. Oh, das ist gut, ja? Sehr gut. I love history. Any history geeks, buffs in the audience? Praise be to God. We are huge history geeks at our place. We drove up. We stopped at every place we could. We're going to be stopping at Gettysburg. We're going to recreate Pickett's Charge. The South will rise again on Wednesday exactly. It's going to rise again. And then we're going to stop at Vicksburg, where my great-great-great-granddaddy served with the 6th Missouri Confederate in 1863. But I have a story here that I want to share with you, and I stole it from this book right here. It's called Church's Spies. This was one of the books that I read to prepare for the talk. And it's a great story. Almost everybody I've ever met has never heard the story I'm going to share with you today, so I think it's really, really good. I bought this book at Clear Creek Abbey Monastery in Oklahoma. I was turning 50 years old. Anybody here turned 50 or older? My deepest sympathies to you. It's horrible, isn't it? It's like, gee whiz. 50 was emotionally wrecked for me because you're old all of a sudden. But I bought this for pure pleasure, not for any real reading or interest otherwise. It just looked interesting, so I bought this book and I couldn't put it down. It was a page turner called Church's Spies, Mark Reibling. It came out about a decade ago. I usually don't do this when giving talks, but I have notes, because dates are important. Dark times come when good men do nothing. Peace comes when good men make a radical choice. That really is the theme and the essence of this talk I'm going to tell you today. January 30th, 1933. Anybody remember that day? None of you are going to confess to that, huh? January 30th, 1933. There was a man by the name of Josef Müller in Berlin, standing at a hotel balcony, and underneath him on the streets below were brown shirt, jackbooted Nazis goose-stepping through the streets. It was a pivotal day in the history of Germany, January 30th, 1933. This was the day that Paul von Hindenburg, president of the Weimar Republic, made Adolf Hitler chancellor. Which is interesting because Adolf Hitler spent a year in prison for trying to overthrow the Weimar Republic in 1923. And between 23 and 33, just 10 years, the Nazis went from total obscurity to total control. The Nazi star was rising in Germany in 1933. It had skyrocketed. And Paul von Hindenburg, who was a general, old school German, but kind of a progressive, the guy who had the name on the airship, the Hindenburg that blew up, burned, he was having a difficult time creating a coalition government. It's kind of the same kind of government they have in, say, England, parliamentary system, in Israel today. You can't just get voted in, you have to actually create a coalition government. And so he was having a real struggle creating a coalition. So he was talked into bringing the Nazis in and giving them more control. He did not want to do that, but he fell to the pressure. And so he allowed Adolf Hitler to become the chancellor. Just 1 month later, in February, the Reichstag was burnt down. That was the building where the parliament would meet. And they would blame it on the communists. In fact, they found a communist in the building at the time, and they basically said the communists were responsible for this catastrophe. So Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, they went to the public and they asked, would you give us the permission, the power, the authority to do what we have to do to save our country against our enemies, the communists. Socialism, National Socialism, which is what the Nazis are, and communism, they are at war with each other over the heart of Marxism. They're two sides of the same coin. Most people think far right. They're actually far left. And there was a war. The Nazis didn't like the communists didn't like the Nazis. The people of Germany voted to give Adolf Hitler and the coalition government all the authority they needed to do as they saw best to protect Germany. That was the one and only vote. There would not be another vote. At that point, the Nazis felt they were totally empowered. The people have given them permission, and they were going to do all that they had designs to do. This was the first stage in the death of the Weimar Republic. Now, Bavaria, however, anybody been to Bavaria? How gorgeous is Bavaria? How Catholic is Bavaria? Amen? Amen. Bavaria is something to behold. When I was last in Bavaria, 1989, I was a Protestant. I was a heathen, really. Didn't go to church, neither did my father, but we were touring. My dad was in the army, visiting all the most beautiful churches. I don't know why we didn't go to any Protestant ones. We only went to the Catholic ones, but nonetheless, incredibly beautiful part of God's country. Bavaria did not vote to empower the Nazis. Bavaria did not want the Nazis in control. The Catholics would resist. And this would upset those Nazis. And so Joey Ox, who stood on that balcony and witnessed firsthand the takeover of the Weimar Republic by the Nazis, he would run as fast as he could back to Bavaria. That was his home state, and he was very well connected. Joey Ox is an attorney. Some call him the Godfather. Some call him Oskar Schindler. That's not his real name, but that's the kind of guy he was. In fact, he had already built a reputation for helping Jews, enemies of the state, the Catholic Church. Anybody the Nazis didn't like, his law practice had a penchant for helping. That earned him a bad reputation among the Nazi circles. He was from Bavaria, and he would serve in their government over the years. He was a World War I vet. He earned the Iron Cross in World War I, but he was a committed Catholic. So he runs back to Bavaria, and he meets with the Prime Minister of the Bavarian Kingdom. His name is Held, H-E-L-D. Herr Held was a bit of a, let's just say, cowardly kind of a man. So Joey Ox, and they called him Joey Ox instead of Josef Müller, is because when he gets back from the war, he pays for his law school by driving an ox cart. So everybody began to call him Joey Ox. When I first heard it, I thought, this guy must be from New Jersey or something, from like a Joey Ox. But no, he's German. So Joey Ox runs to his buddy, Prime Minister Held, and he tells him, listen, they're coming for you. You need to call out the guard. You're the Prime Minister. This is a separate state. You have the authority. Call the guard. And do what? Arrest the SS, most especially Heinrich Himmler, and then execute him. This was his sage advice. You guys remember Heinrich Himmler? Himmler was the pudgy school teacher looking guy with the round glasses. He was in charge of the SS. He was in charge of the secret police, the Gestapo. He was in charge at one time or another of the Waffen SS, which was the military arm of the SS. Heinrich Himmler was coming to take Bavaria by force. And Joey Ox beat him to the punch, and he's there in the office of the Prime Minister, Herr Held. They're meeting, they're discussing what to do next. And guess who busts through the door? Himmler. Himmler busts in, comes right in, and demands that the Prime Minister relinquish Bavaria to the SS and to the Nazis and to Germany. Held asked for time. He says, you have till dawn. And then he walks out. Joey Ox tried. He implored, please call the guard out. You have to arrest this man. You have to execute him now. But Held would refuse. He was afraid of a civil war in Germany. So instead, Joey Ox drives him across the Alps into Switzerland, where he would live in exile for the rest of the war. But not Joey Ox. He gets in the car and drives back. Would you drive back? Would you have come back to where there is trouble? You don't know how it's going to end, but you don't think it's going to end well. Joey Ox did not think that what was coming was good. He thought it was going to be bad. He saw the Nazis up close, and he thought it was going to be like a virus unleashed upon mankind. So he comes back, and he begins to leverage his law firm in a way that, again, would create a reputation, let's just say, that doesn't do him any favors. In fact, in February the 9th, 1934, Heinrich Himmler, the SS chief, will have Joey Ox arrested and brought in for questioning. Himmler himself will do the interrogation. He wants to know only one thing, just one thing. Herr Müller, what advice did you give to Held when I came into the meeting? Oh, that's easy. I told him to call out the guard, to have you arrested, and then shot. Would you have told him the truth? This is a man who would have you killed without even thinking about it. In fact, many will die at the hands of Himmler over the course of the next few years. Many, 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 many tens of thousands will die because of Himmler. But Joey Ox knew that. Himmler is so impressed with the audacity, with the candor, that Himmler offers him a job. You are just the sort that we need here at the SS. Why don't you come work for me? What does Joey Ox say? There's no way. There's no way. I am Catholic. I cannot work for you. There's nothing in common between Catholics and Nazis. My brother is a priest. I would never work for you. Would you have said that to a man who had the power of life or death over you? Most people wouldn't. Most people would lie to save their skin, but not Joey Ox on that February the 9th, 1934. Himmler is so impressed at this point with this man's courage. And frankly, the Nazis, this is a reoccurring theme, the Nazis aren't used to people standing up to them. Kind of like anti-Catholic evangelists like we encountered at Niagara Falls just the other day. They are used to picking easy targets and then throwing a couple of verses at you and picking you off, and you're just prey for their taking. But when you stand up to them and you throw a few more verses back at them and you hold your ground, they don't really know what to do about that. In fact, I had to pull my son away from debating. We're going to be here all night. Good grief. I got to get to New Hampshire. Let's go, pal. Leave the Protestant alone. It was a good time. Himmler is so impressed with Joey Ox's courage that what does he do? He does not have him executed. Instead, he releases him and says, well done on your defense. You may go, and lets him out, lets him free. The word gets around the SS that someone stood up to Himmler, and that Himmler was impressed that one SS agent in particular had to have a meeting with this now famous Joey Ox. His name was Johann Rothenhuber. Rothenhuber, what a name that is, right? Rothenhuber. He was the chief bodyguard for Adolf Hitler himself, for the SS. Johann Rothenhuber, also a World War I vet, he was a weird bird. He serves Adolf Hitler directly in charge of his bodyguard. He works for the SS, but he doesn't really like the Nazis all that much. It's a weird thing, and it talks about that in the book. But he has to have a meeting with this Joey Ox. He's got to get to know the guy who stood up to Himmler, so he takes him out for a beer. And they become fast friends. In fact, Rothenhuber will play a significant role throughout the next couple of years with Joey Ox, and especially towards the end. But they become beer brothers, and it is an important relationship. At this point, Cardinal Faulhaber, who is the prelate of Germany, he sees that the dark skies have come, and he is struggling to create a system in which he can clearly communicate back to the Vatican all that is happening. You might be familiar with the name of Eugenio Pacelli. Eugenio Pacelli was the ambassador to Germany, and then he was recalled to the Vatican, and he was elevated to Cardinal Secretary of State, Eugenio Pacelli. The one and only encyclical ever to be written in German was basically ghost-written by Eugenio Pacelli. Pope Pius XI would sign his name to it, but it was really Eugenio Pacelli's writing. This man had a real heart, a desire, a love for the German people, and he was trying his best to have an impact in Germany. But at this point, he created the Concordat with Germany. So the Vatican creates these concordats with all the governments of the world, and they are working relationships to ensure that the bishops and the clergy, the priests, are able to function properly in each country. So Eugenio Pacelli, as Cardinal Secretary of State, created the Concordat with the Nazi government in Germany. But that was not a two-way relationship. It was really just one way. The bishops can say anything they wanted to the Vatican, but all of that correspondence would be read by the SS and the secret police. And they knew that. Cardinal Fulhalber knew this. So they needed to create a system in which they could communicate back to the Home Office. Well, Joey Ox, again, has a reputation. He helps Jews, he helps gypsies, and he helps the Catholic Church. So Cardinal Fulhalber calls in Joey Ox, and he asks Joey to help him save a holding company, a media holding company that helps the Catholic Church communicate through mass media in Germany. So Joey uses his law firm for this. At the same time, Joey is basically on the low recruited to become a spy for the Vatican. Joey, as an interesting character as he is, he owns an airplane, a single-seater, a little sports plane. Joey begins to fly clandestine flights back to Italy, where he would sneak secret correspondence from Cardinal Fulhalber and the German clergy under his seat over the Alps, and he would pass that off to a courier who would take it down to Eugenio Pacelli, Cardinal Secretary of State, the Vatican. He would fly many missions at that point. At this point, he also keeps track. He uses his law firm to keep track of all of the concordant violations. So there was already many rumors about mass executions and SS hit squads and all kinds of things like abusing bishops and priests, etc. So his law firm would keep these records, and then he would take these records along with the secret intelligence back to the Vatican. Now, because he was also known as the Godfather, just like, I mean, who's seen the Godfather movie here? Yeah, you remember how, like, I'll forget about it. I'll do you a favor. Someday, I'm going to come and ask you for something. Okay? Yeah, sounds like a fair deal. That's Joey Ox. By the late 1930s, Joey Ox has hundreds of favors owed to him. Hundreds all over Germany. This man has done so many favors for so many people. People owe him a lot. So he was able to build a very successful spy network through all these favors. Johann Rattenhuber, the chief bodyguard of Adolf Hitler, being among them, right? So he had intelligence sources from all walks, from all agencies, from everywhere. He knew what was going on, and he was able to leverage that network for the benefit of Holy Mother Church. And this is exactly what he did as he flew his little sports plane in danger, in fact. There was lots of danger. March 29th, 1934. Cardinal Secretary of State Eugenio Pacelli is so impressed and so grateful for the work and the courage of Joey Ox that he arranges for Joey to marry his fiancée, Maria, in one of the most special places you could ever visit. How many people have been to Rome? Raise your hand. How many people have been down into the crypt? Like the special tour? Okay. Did you see St. Peter's bones? Yeah, I was just there back in November. I filmed a documentary film in Rome on the end times. And they wouldn't let me film down there, unfortunately, but it is an amazing tour. When you go down, they show you the excavation that Eugenio Pacelli would spearhead. While the war was going on, they were looking and searching for St. Peter's tomb, for his bones in particular. Today, if you go there, you have to do this probably at least a month in advance. You reserve your tickets for the Scavi tour. It is $15. It is worth every penny times 20. It is so amazing. You're going to get to what they call the graffiti wall, and there is an altar. This graffiti wall has graffiti that dates back to the 1st century. You know, basically, here lies Peter. They're etching. The pilgrims have already begun etching I think the wall actually dates back to the 2nd century, if I'm correct, but nonetheless, the pilgrims were there early. And what's interesting about it is when you're looking at that altar, and it's an ad orientem altar, so Deo gratias, right? It's a very small, tight chapel. When you look at this red graffiti wall, the archaeologists find that they thought the bones were going to be on this side of that wall. So if I'm looking with you and we're all facing liturgically east, amen, it would be on this side. But that's not where they found the bones. And it threw a curveball at the excavators and the archaeologists. They weren't quite sure. They found the bones on this side instead. And the theory goes, at least my tour guide seemed to suggest this, that the theory is that when you have the persecutions of the late 200s, they removed the bones of Peter and Paul from their graves, and they moved them out to the Via Appia, Pass Quo Vadis. I'll come back to that in a moment. And they kept them out there, what is now today St. Sebastian's, and that's where the pilgrims would go, and they would, clandestinely, they didn't want anybody to know the bones were out there, and then they would make their pilgrimage to out at the Via Appia. Constantine rises to power. He brings Christianity out of the catacombs and makes them legal. He also becomes one of our greatest sponsors and supporters by building the first basilica at St. Peter's on the Vatican Hill. And he brings the bones of Peter and Paul back to their rightful burying places. But instead of putting it back on the right side, which is where it was before Constantine, he hides it on the left to protect them from the future, because you just never know. You just never know. In fact, there would be an apostate emperor who would be so angry about what happened to his family under Constantine that he would become a pagan again, and he would try to be baptized in bull's blood, and he'd wear a habit like a pagan monk and all the rest. And he would try to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, but God would forbid all of that. So anyway, this is the location where Joey Ox is married to his fiancée Maria, because Joey Ox was as courageous as he was and flew all of these missions with all the secret correspondence. And if he had been caught, he most surely would have been executed as a traitor and a spy for the Vatican. But Eugenio Pacelli wanted to award him and arranged for them to marry in this one of the most special places in Holy Mother Church. August the 2nd, 1934, Paul von Hindenburg, president of the Weimar Republic, would die. And so with him, finally, the Weimar Republic would die. Adolf Hitler, who had already taken a vote from the people and obtained all the authority and permission he ever needed from the German people, made himself Führer, or dictator, and there would not be any more president, and there would not be any more chancellor. Not really. Even though he still retained the title of chancellor, he is now dictator, and now the Nazis are in complete and full control over Germany. The Weimar Republic truly dead. Now, at this stage, 1934, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, he's one of my favorites. He is living in Nagasaki, Japan at this point. Nagasaki, Japan. He goes there after he builds Niepokolonov in Poland, outside Warsaw, and he wants to spread Our Lady, the City of Our Lady, and the Night of the Immaculate, which is his publication. So he goes to Japan. He felt called to go to Japan. They tried to get him to stay in China, and he's like, nope, I'm supposed to go to Japan. So he goes and he shows up in Nagasaki, which is, by the way, the most Catholic, dense portion of Japan is Nagasaki, and that plays a pivotal role too. So he shows up, the bishop is on vacation or somewhere else, and they didn't know what to do with him. He was unannounced, uninvited. Can you speak Japanese? No. I don't know, buddy. I'm not sure you can stay. Bishop comes back, he makes a deal. He will teach theology and English to the seminarians in exchange for allowing the Franciscans to settle in Nagasaki and build a monastery. So in 1934, this is what he's up to. In fact, he has to find a piece of land, and he has two options. Option one, someone is going to donate land to him. Now, you got to understand, those first few years in Nagasaki, they were starving to death. They literally had barely any food. They were living in very poor accommodations. They were sick. It was really difficult living for these Franciscans. But someone offered to donate the land for free The other option was to pay for a piece of land in Nagasaki on the backside of one of the hills. Maximilian Kolbe chose to buy the land and not take the donation. He said, Our Lady desires this property to be the place for the monastery. Because on that property was the mass gravesite of Catholics who were martyred 300 years before. In fact, the owners of the land, which was a group of owners, they could never develop the land. Every time they tried, it would fail. There was one man who he wanted to plant an orchard full of apricot trees, I think it was. And when he began the digging, they found human remains, and they would all freak out. Some people said they saw ghosts on the property, so everybody would back out of the deals, but not St. Max Kolbe. In fact, when he took the friars there for the first time, he takes them down to where the location is, where the burial site is known to be. And that is where he's going to build a grotto to Our Lady of Lourdes. That is also where, under a statue, they have these Japanese statues. They're like watchmen. They're not idols, so to speak. They're like almost like guardian angel-like things, and they would overlook sacred sites. And so they set one up because of the mass grave site. Well, after Max Kolbe buys the property, locals come and remove that statue and take it into town and protect it. But under that statue, they discovered a crucifix that goes back 300 years. This was the only access to the Catholic faith for the Catholic faithful in Nagasaki, because they had no sacraments to live by. Could you imagine no confession? I mean, how would my wife confess all of my sins if there was no priest to confess to? You know what I'm saying? That would be very difficult. That would be very difficult for her. Pray for her. Max Kolbe would return, though. In 1936, he would get very sick there in Nagasaki, where he built this wonderful monastery, and he would be recalled back to Poland. Niepokolanów. How many people know of it or have heard of it or been there? This city of Our Lady. It is the largest monastery in the history of the church. It's an entire city. He has a water treatment facility. He has an airport. He has his own radio station. He prints millions of copies of the Night in multiple languages. He was so effective in spreading the good news through his publication that the local newspaper conglomerate hated him, and they forbid him from accessing their distribution network. So no paper boys, no kiosks. So Max Kolbe simply built his own kiosks and recruited his own paper boys, and he flew it. One of the friars learn to fly the airplane and fly the paper all over Europe in multiple languages. And this is where he comes back to. There was well over 700 friars, over 150 postulants. I mean, the place was packed to the gills and growing fast. February 10th, 1939, Pope Pius XI would die. Just a couple of weeks later, basically a month, March 12th, Pope Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, would ascend to the papal throne on the very same day that Adolf Hitler would issue the orders to occupy Slovakia. So you couldn't have gotten him fast enough. The cardinals knew they needed Eugenio Pacelli at this time. He was the most qualified man. He was the man for the time. Again, he had been ambassador in Germany, and then, of course, Cardinal Secretary of State, and he had already begun to build the spy network that would play a pivotal role. So now he is the Pope. But his role as Pope gets incredibly complicated, and this is where you start to, in hindsight, history being what it is now, hindsight being 2020, people have called him Hitler's Pope. Has anybody heard the term Hitler's Pope? You read this book, you're not going to believe that anymore. Trust me on that. Now, Poland will be invaded September the 1st, 1939. So just a couple of months later, Poland is invaded. On September the 1st, 1939, the Germans, in their blitzkrieg, which is to invade and to attack as fast as possible, they would bomb Niepokolanów, the monastery of St. Max Kolbe. In fact, they would have him arrested. He would be arrested fairly quickly, and he would be thrown into a concentration camp, but they would let him go just a couple of months later because he converted the base, the warden, the commandant of the base. So they sent him home to his monastery so he wouldn't cause any more trouble for the Nazis and the guards and such. So he would go back to to his beloved Neopolkonov. September the 27th, 1939, so just 26 days later, there is a very shady tree character. He's an importer and exporter. His name is William Schmidhuber. Okay, so this is a businessman. He's a merchant. He's self-interested. He calls Joey Ox, September the 27th, 1939, and he conveys an interesting message. Joey, the Abwehr, Admiral Canaris, wants to see you in Berlin, Stadt. Now this is interesting. The Abwehr is the German Army intelligence. It's like their CIA, okay? If the Abwehr wanted to see Joey Ox, why didn't they just arrest him? Why send him this message through the shady tree character William Schmidhuber? Joey could have run. He had already been interrogated by Himmler. Will he run this time? No. So he gets in his plane and he flies to Berlin from Munich, and he casually struts over to the Abwehr office, and he goes in and he's greeted by Hans Oster, one of the Abwehr officers. And Oster sits him down. Now, how many people have seen the movie The Matrix? It came out like 20 billion years ago, Matrix. Do you remember that? Remember that famous scene from Agent Smith, the guy with the glasses and the earpiece? And this is when Mr. Anderson was not yet Neo. It was like the beginning, first act of the movie, and he sits him down in the interrogation room, and he pulls out this giant file and he plops it on the desk. Mr. Anderson. And he starts going through the list of everything they know, and they know everything about him. This is what Hans Oster does to Joey Ox. He goes through this file on Joey and says he knows everything. He knows about the flights to Rome. He knows about his relationship with Eugenio Pacelli, now Pope Pius XII. He knows that he's been working against the Nazi regime and helping the Catholic Church. So what does he do? He offers him a job. And what does Mueller say? Joey Ox, if what's in that file is true and you know everything about me, then you should know I would never work for you because I'm Catholic. Would you have said that? Could you imagine? Hans Oster leans forward and goes, I'm going to share something with you that's going to put my life in danger because I want to win your trust. And he tells him, the Abwehr is not only the intelligence agency of the German army, but it's also the headquarters for the resistance against Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And so he shares this secret with him because now they're both implicated. And he offers him another job and says, we need you. We need your network. We need your connections at the Vatican. We need Pope Pius XII to help us negotiate a deal with the Allied forces so that we can topple this Nazi regime and bring about a better government, and the place won't be completely destroyed and save some lives. He gives them some time to think this over. In fact, Joey Ox would get in his plane just a week later, and now it's October of 1939. He'd fly to Rome, and there he would be contemplating what his next move would be. He goes to the gardens just outside Quo Vadis. Again, anybody been to Quo Vadis in Rome? Does anybody know the story of Quo Vadis in Rome? How many of you have seen the old movie Quo Vadis? Google it. It's free on YouTube. Just watch it. It's fantastic. It's Quo Vadis, St. Peter. I included it in my documentary film. I went there and I filmed there. It's an amazing story. St. Peter is hiding in the catacombs at this point. And if you watch my film, and it's all on YouTube, The Secret of the Saints in the End Times, if you go to the Joe McClain YouTube channel, you can watch the entire movie for free. It's called The Secret of the Saints in the End Times. Now, there's a local legend, and I prefer this legend over any other historical telling because it's cooler. It's just way cooler. You guys remember Simon Magus, the story from the Acts? Remember when Peter encounters Simon Magus and he tries to buy the gifts, buy confirmation? He wants the power that he sees because he's a wizard. He plays and dabbles with the occult. He likes to manipulate and be the guy who everybody comes to. Well, after that encounter in the book of Acts, Simon, he takes his wife, so to speak, and they go to Rome. And they befriend, of all people, Nero. He becomes the court wizard for Nero. And he begins to show off his magic, his occult. In fact, there is a statue on an island in the Tiber River to Simon Magus. They worshipped him as a god. There was a cult of worship for Simon as a pagan god. He and his mistress, they're in Rome. And he promised, he boasted to Nero that he would fly through the air, that he would levitate and fly. And so the word got out, and they set the date, and it was going to be a big deal. And so the crowd comes, Nero's there. And Simon Magus, through the power of the occult, through demonic influence, flies through the air. Because Satan is the ape of God. So our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, because he ascends, so the devils want to pretend. They want to take what is good and twist it into something perverted. And so this is what Simon was trying to do. But guess who's there? According to local legend. Don't fact check me on it, just go with it. Peter and Paul. Peter and Paul. Paul does not die at the end of the letter of Acts. The book ends abruptly. He does not die then. He actually will be released after 2 years of house prison. He will go to España, back to Macedonia, before he will eventually be rearrested and come back to Rome under chain. But nonetheless, they're there on the day that Simon rises to the heaven. Now you have the dueling Simons, Simon Magus and Simon Bar Jonah. Peter going head to head. And guess who wins? It ain't Magus. It's Simon Bar Jonah. It is St. Peter. As they pray, Simon comes crashing down and he lands hard. And if you've ever been to Rome, there are no soft surfaces in Rome. Why the Romans don't like plush carpeting, I'll never know. It's always hard stuff. So he lands. In fact, his blood would spurt all over Nero. And he would not die immediately. It would take him a couple of days, but he would die in utter agony, screaming. He would die. Nero was not happy that St. Peter and Paul just defeated and killed his court wizard. And this is what stirs up the ire of Nero, at least according to the local legend. And this is why he comes after them. This is why they're hiding in the catacombs. And it is said that the local community begged Peter to get out of town. Beg him to get out of town. Leave. We need you. Peter acquiesces, and he's on the Via Appia, which is the edge just outside the walls. Rome is a fortified city. It's got walls. And so outside of the Via Appia, the road, which would take you south to Pompeii, he's on this road. And I went there. I filmed there. It's fantastic. But as he's right at the edge, the last gate, guess who's walking the other way, walking back towards Rome as he's walking away? It is our Lord and Savior. He goes, Domine, quo vadis? Where are you going, Lord? Jesus turns to him and says, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again because you won't. Oh, Lord. Oh, that's a low blow. All right, fine. But the legend also has it that Peter didn't want to leave anyway. It wasn't that Peter was afraid to die. He was acquiescing to the community who was begging him. But he knew he must go back, and he knew he must suffer and die. So he did. He turns around, he goes back. So this is the location that Joey Ox comes to in 1939, October 1939. He meets a certain Monsignor Cass. And they start with small talk, but it begins to get very serious. Joey had not fully committed to being a spy for the Abwehr. Right now, as of this very moment, he is a spy for the Vatican. But he has to make a choice. By doing both, he actually will bring the Vatican in grave harm, specifically Pius XII. Grave harm, serious risk, and he wasn't sure what to do. But his meeting with Monsignor Cass would convince him that he must go all in. He must make that radical choice. And so he passes the Abwehr documents, and he informs Monsignor Cass, who will bring it to Pius XII, that the Abwehr intends to kill Hitler. And they want the Pope to say that is okay. And they want the Pope to help them kill Hitler. Let that sink in for a second. Pope Pius XII, he will go through the Vatican gardens, and he will contemplate the severity, the depth of this request. Is it okay to kill Hitler? He leaned heavy on Thomas Aquinas and tyrannicide and the doctrine on tyrannicide, and basically there was some conditions that had to be met. Was everything else tried first? Have we tried all other means first? If in killing this man, is there immediate relief to those that suffer most? And there were one or two others. It's all documented in the book. Pius XII determined that these conditions had been met, and he gave his approval to the Abwehr conspirators to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He even allowed his spy network to participate in that effort, and we're going to come back to that as well. So Pius XII made a decision in October of 1939 when he met with Joey Ox to communicate this back to the Abwehr spy ring. And at that point, they both agreed to pray for each other. So every day, Pius XII would pray specifically for Joey Ox, and Joey Ox would pray for Pius XII every day, at least until they would meet fate. In November of 1939, there is an evil. So every story has to have an arch villain, right? There is an evil Benedictine monk. I mean, you couldn't write this stuff better. I mean, Da Vinci Code was a bunk. It was all nonsense. This is like the real thing. This really happened. There was an evil monk in this story. His name was Hermann Keller. He was a Benedictine, but he was a pro-Nazi. In fact, he tried to turn his entire Benedictine monastery into a Nazi stronghold, but the monastery and the community didn't want it. So they resisted him, but Hermann Keller and his allies at the SS were like pretty persuasive, until Joey Ox comes to the rescue. And using his legal skills, he gets Hermann Keller booted out and sent far east. Well, Hermann Keller comes back. Now he's an SS spy, still wearing his habit as a Benedictine monk, leveraging it for the SS in Rome to find connections inside the Vatican to provide intel back to the Nazis and the SS. Well, Hermann Keller catches wind over a beer stein one night in Rome that his old buddy Joey Ox has been making frequent trips. Oh, really, you say? Who's he been meeting with? Monsignor Koss, you say. Oh, this is interesting. So this evil Benedictine monk, he actually dimes him out. He turns him in. And it comes very close at this point to Joey Ox being the end of his story. Joey flies back to Rome. He's immediately called into the Abwehr. Admiral Canaris, who is in charge of the entire Abwehr, the intelligence service, he sees him in the hall and goes, "Oh, you're to blame. This is all your fault, isn't it?" And they're not sure what's going to happen next. They thought the SS was going to come swooping in and arrest him, and the whole thing would be up. The spy ring would be done. But they flipped it on its head. Admiral Canaris tells the SS, Joey Ox is an undercover agent for us at the Vatican. He is giving us intelligence about the Vatican and Pius XII and all the rest. Oh, das ist gut. Ja? Sehr gut. All right, we're good. So Joey is saved by the skin of his teeth. Hermann Keller, he wouldn't go away though. He'll come back. Skip forward, February the 17th, 1941. St. Maximilian Kolbe would receive a phone call that morning, at dawn. And he gets a call from the porter, the friar who works the front gate. And all he hears is the Gestapo are at the front gate. And what the porter hears in return from St. Maximilian Kolbe is, "Yes, Mary." And then he hangs up the phone. All night long, St. Maximilian Kolbe had gotten up in the middle of the night, and he went from cell to cell, waking his brother friars up and praying with them. Because he knew it was his night of passion. And he knew that the next morning he would be arrested. And so when the Gestapo come to the front, to the front door, to the office, I guess you can say, or the house, he goes out to greet them. And then he gives them a tour. He shows them around. Now, they had undercover SS agents already on the premise. He knew all of them. In fact, he was notorious for knowing who the undercover people were, because he would always try to get them to wear a miraculous medal. Always. He gives them a tour, shows them around, and then they take him off. And he would be taken eventually to Auschwitz. And in August 14th, 1941, they would, of course, kill him. Now, it's interesting because back in Texas, in Houston, I have a friend whose father stood 3 rows behind St. Maximilian Kolbe on the day that he volunteered to die. His dad was again 3 rows behind, and they were lined up. Now, there was one of the prisoners escaped, and the rule was for 1 escape, 10 must die. And usually they want to starve them because it's horrible, right? It's a horrible experience. You get the screams, the curses, the agony, and you get usually about 2 weeks of that, and that's to benefit you because you want the prisoners to hear that for 2 weeks so that they'll all be scared and no one wants to escape. So when the guy escaped, they took the entire cell block and they made him stand almost like a military attention in a formation, in rows. And they weren't allowed to fall. They weren't allowed to kneel. They weren't allowed to sit. They weren't allowed to fall out. If they did, they'd be attacked by the dogs or shot or whatever. So they stood there all night long. And at dawn, Karl Fritz, you should Google this man's name, Karl Fritz. You should look him in the eyes. I firmly believe this man was possessed by the devil. But nonetheless, you look him in the eyes and you'll see the anger, the hatred. You'll see the ugliness in his eyes. This Karl Fritz, he liked to play psychological games with the prisoners. So as my friend's father would say, standing 3 rows behind on that fateful day, Karl would walk up and down the line and he would look you in the eye and then he'd go, you're gonna die, you know? So everybody was always scared. Nobody knew what was gonna happen. They were always very frightened. Well, my friend's father was chosen that day by one of these things. You know, Fritz was up front and he points to the back, you're gonna die, or you're it, right? Picking his 10. But he said his dad was so frightened that he couldn't physically move. He was stoned. He was just like a stone statue. So the guy next to him thought maybe he meant me. And that guy took a step. And that guy died. My friend was born because his dad didn't move that day. Because he hadn't been married yet. And they had no children yet. So when the last person is chosen, his name was Giovanni. He was a Jewish-Polish fella. And he's chosen, the 10th person. And he begins to sob uncontrollably. My wife, my kids. This is when St. Max said, this is the moment. And he breaks through the lines. Get out of my way, get out of my way. And he just rushes up to Karl Fritz. This had never been done. This emaciated, incredibly sick with tuberculosis Catholic priest, St. Maximilian Kolbe, scared all of the Nazis. They all took a step back. Think about that for a second. The Nazis thought they had the power of life or death over you. You got to live or die because they said so. St. Maximilian Kolbe never once believed that, not for 1 second. To him, only God could decide this. Is this not what Jesus says, our Lord, to Pontius Pilate? You would have no power over me unless my Father above granted it. Max Kolbe was never a prisoner of the Nazis. Never. And he knew it. He walked straight up to Karl Fritz. Who are you? I'm the Catholic priest. What do you want? I want to replace this man. Took him a moment, but Karl Fritz agreed because he hated Catholics. In fact, Catholics would die. The next biggest block of victims from the Nazis was always Catholics. So he would starve for 2 weeks, but they couldn't kill him for starving him. He sang hymns, he prayed for 2 weeks. There was no screaming, there was no yelling, there was no agony. He led the others in prayer. He would help them die peacefully. And then after 2 weeks, they would kill him by carbolic acid injection on August 14th, 1941. December 1941. Joey Ox and the Jesuits in Germany. Can we make Jesuits great again? Should we get hats, make Jesuits? There was Monsignor Roche, Father Delp. These are some of the Jesuits that were involved. They would meet with a man by the name of Moltke. He was an Abwehr officer. Moltke would involve people like Donani, another Abwehr officer who would recruit his brother-in-law, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Anybody heard of Bonhoeffer? Yeah, so the Protestants wanted to kill Hitler, but they were too afraid to do anything about it. The Catholics were like, let's kill Hitler. Let's do this thing. So the Protestants who wanted more action had to go working with the Catholics because they were the only ones that would do anything. So Moltke, who was a Protestant, would team up with Joey Ox and Father Delp and Monsignor Roche and the Jesuits, and they would create what they call the committee. Their job was to assist the conspirators in both the assassination attempts, but more importantly, the Jesuits would give retreats, spiritual retreats to the conspirators. They would also help to organize and plan what the shape, the form of the government would be after they were successful in killing Adolf Hitler. So the committee was meeting routinely. Joey Ox was a part of that. Pentecost, actually back up, January 20th, 1942, January 20th. Herr Heydrich, he was the chief spy for the SS. His boss was Himmler. They get together on January 20th, and they plan the extermination of all Jews across Europe. But it's not just Jews, again, it's also Catholics. Dachau, which I've been to, anybody been to Dachau? Mostly Catholics at that place. A lot of Catholic bishops, priests, layfolk. Huge numbers of Catholics would be religious, of course. We all know St. Edith Stein, right? So a lot of Catholics would die in these camps. There were many camps. We've heard of a couple, Auschwitz, Dachau, but there were a lot of camps, and a lot of people died as a result. Well, that was being planned through Heydrich, a man by the name of Heydrich. January 20th, 1942. Pentecost, 1942. Remember when I told you about that shady tree importer, exporter guy, William Schmidhuber, who gave Joey Ox that call and said, hey, Admiral Canaris wants to talk to you? Well, he gets found out and he gets arrested by the SS. This whole time, since that last phone call, the Abwehr was not just planning to execute Adolf Hitler and Himmler and a few of the others. They wanted a bunch, by the way. They were also laundering money that came from America, and Schmidhuber's job was to launder that money because he's the importer, right? He's the merchant. So he gets the money, he launders it into German marks, and then they use that money to rescue Jews out and get them out of. So Joey Ox's law firm helps with the legal paperwork. Schmidhuber gets the money laundered. The two of them collaborate through the Abwehr's resources, and they're trying to save as many Jews as they possibly can. Well, he gets busted for this, and he gets arrested. But so at this point, he does not talk. This is Pentecost 1942. He is not talking. Mum's the word. Heydrich, the SS spy chief, just 1 month later in May, he is assassinated in Prague by Catholics. These Catholics, they run to a Greek Orthodox church and they hide. The SS track them down and they slaughter all of them in a giant gun battle. Some of them are dying by suicide, actually. They'd rather die at their own hand than by the SS. It becomes a bloody battle. Now, it's important because the SS know that Pius XII is not their friend, and they're looking for concrete evidence to prove this. But these assassins, they don't run to a Catholic church, they run to the Greek Orthodox Church, making it harder for them to connect those dots. But to the SS, it's all the same. July 1942, Joey Ox brings Dietrich Bonhoeffer to the Vatican, takes him down to the crypt, gives him the nickel tour, the Scavi tour. Before it was the Scavi tour, Bonhoeffer got one of the first opportunities to see the crypt, to see where St. Peter was buried, to see the graffiti wall. And Monsignor Koss and several of the prelates, people like Montini, that name will come later in life as Paul VI, they will take turns trying to evangelize young Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was not married at this point. He was saved by his brother-in-law, a man by the name of Donani. Donani saved his brother because there was the required military service. Dietrich was a pacifist pastor, and to help him, he gave him a job with the Abwehr as a spy and a media PR kind of a person. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer took that job. But Joey Ox brings him to the Vatican for what they call the Vatican Crypt Talks, and they're trying to evangelize him. And one thing Bonhoeffer says is, and it's quoted in the book, is he sees the power and the beauty of the celibate priesthood. Because he knew that the day could come very easily, because he was preparing to marry. He had a fiancée and they were preparing to marry, that his wife could be leveraged against him. And that a celibate priest could give everything to Christ and to his church and to the mission. You can't blackmail him with a wife. You can't blackmail him with children. He has given it all. Bonhoeffer saw the beauty in that. And I thought that was a very touching remark. April 1943. Our good buddy William Schmidhuber finally caves in under torture, and he talks. He names names. The SS finally have what they need. All of the, we know that Joey Ox is a shady character, but we don't have the proof. Now they've got the proof. They come sweeping into the Abwehr's offices in Berlin, and they cannot yet arrest Admiral Canaris, although they don't trust him yet. He's the boss. But he's a boss with a lot of power. He's a boss with a great reputation. They can't just sweep him off the streets just yet. So they let Canaris stay. But they arrest Hans Oster, they arrest Donani, they arrest Bonhoeffer, and then the team calls Joey Ox and warns him, they're coming. Get out. Joey Ox has a decision to make. He could have very easily gotten to his plane and flew over the Alps. He could have flown to Switzerland. He would have gotten away. He could have flown to Spain. It's debatable where Franco was in the war with all of this. I'm sure we could have a hot debate after this on that, but he didn't. Instead, he calls his secretary at the office and says, burn as many papers as you can. And then he goes home and he tries to burn as many papers as he can, takes out a suitcase, packs his best suit in there because he knows he's going to need it for his trial. And then he spends time with his wife and his daughter, knowing that this may be the last time they'll ever see each other. When the Gestapo shows up, he is with his daughter out on the back porch, looking at the bird feeders. And then they escort him away. Now, the wife is not arrested, but she is harassed, and they try to break into his safe in the office and everything else. Now, the conspirators will all be taken to concentration camps and be tortured, but Joey Ox made a promise. He made a promise to Hans Oster, the officer who interrogated him like in the Matrix film. He made a promise that after they shared their little secrets with each other, that they would agree to go to the gallows alone, that they would never name names. Joey Ox made this promise to Hans Oster, and he intended to keep it. So as they're being tortured, they're getting nothing out of them. In fact, Joey is incredibly intelligent. By this point, he knows the games. In fact, he builds a network even within the prison system. So he is getting information still fed to him by his good buddy Johann Rattenhuber, the chief bodyguard of Adolf Hitler. And so he gets information, and he knows what they're going to ask him before they ask him. So even in the interrogation room, he's able to outmaneuver them every step of the way. And it really infuriates them. But this would not last forever. On April the 8th, 1945, I should back up one. 1944, July 20th. How many people saw that documentary film starring Tom Cruise as Klaus von Stauffenberg? Remember that? Valkyrie? You seriously haven't seen the movie Valkyrie? Okay, that's your homework assignment. Do not give them absolution until they've seen this film. I don't know if that's allowed, but you should do that because that's... Okay, there's no real good German accents in the film. There's just a bunch of Brits and then Tom Cruise. But forget about all of that. It's still a fun movie, and it's historical revisionism to some degree, but it's also got a lot of very good details. Klaus von Stauffenberg was a colonel for the army serving in North Africa. He was wounded. He lost a hand, he lost some fingers, and he lost an eye. But he was a committed Catholic, and he hated the Nazis. He fought with his brothers because that was his duty as a soldier, but he did not want to fight for the Nazis. So he volunteered himself to assassinate Adolf Hitler. So when Canaris gets his office raided by the SS, and his second in command, Oster, Donani, Bonhoeffer, Joey Ox, they all get arrested and carried away, Canaris has a big decision to make. He could pretend right now that he had nothing to do with it and probably get away with his life. But Canaris, he's not the most courageous man, but he chooses to go forward with it anyway. and he recruits Klaus von Stauffenberg. Klaus will try to kill Hitler twice. The goal was with a bomb. It wasn't the first attempt. In fact, there were more than 50 attempts to kill Adolf Hitler during the war. Did you know that? There was so many attempts, and they would all be foiled, one after another. It was insane. I believe, of course, God's, allows these things to happen to bring about a greater good. But I certainly believe that the devil had something to say and do about this, protecting this man. Klaus, on the first attempt, wanted to detonate a bomb inside of a concrete bunker, the wolf's lair, which was out in the forest. Now, this would have been very effective. Everyone would have died because it was a concrete bunker. There's no place for the compression to go, so everyone dies. But it gets called off at the last second. In fact, they're in the room. Hitler's in the room. They're all in the room meeting. Klaus has to leave the room, and he has to call back to the conspirators and ask for permission. Feet from the people he's trying to kill, and ask for permission to detonate the bomb. And they ask, is Himmler there? No. Then you may not detonate the bomb. They wanted to kill Himmler and Hitler at the same time to help with the transition of the government. Now, Klaus von Stauffenberg, he was appointed the second in command of the reserve army back in Berlin, which gives him unique access to give intelligence briefings to Adolf Hitler. So he had access to Hitler. But they took something called Valkyrie, which is a plan that they created in the event that Hitler would die, executed, die in combat or whatever, something happens to him. Valkyrie, the order Valkyrie would be implemented, and the reserve army in Berlin would take control of the city. They would lock it down and take martial control over the city, therefore allowing the government to proceed without chaos or civil war. But the conspirators under Cardinal Canaris, or Admiral Canaris rather, and Klaus von Stauffenberg, they rewrote the plan, and they had Hitler sign it, giving them more flexibility in how they would leverage Valkyrie. And the goal was to leverage it to the conspirators' advantage. I'll explain. So the second attempt, July 20th, 1944. Klaus von Stauffenberg takes his bomb to the wolf's lair, and he tries as quickly as possible in a side room under like he pretended because of his wounds would leak, especially his stub. It would, because he had missed a hand. It would leak a lot. It was blood all over the place. So he feigned that he wanted to change his shirt so he wouldn't look, dirty in front of the Fuhrer. So he goes to the side room with his assistant, and they're trying to activate the bomb. But the guy on the outside of the door comes in and catches him. But he doesn't see the bomb because they're covering it with their bodies, and they're able to get it back into the briefcase. But they only activate half the bomb. Then it gets worse. They're not in the concrete bunker today. They're in the map room, which is a wooden structure with windows. You're not going to get that compression effect anymore. So when the bomb goes off, you got a problem. You got half the bomb, and the table is a giant thick oak table, and the bomb is placed underneath it. Essentially, the table will protect Adolf Hitler's life. There'll be, I think, one person dies, many are maimed, but Adolf Hitler will barely get a scratch out of the deal. In fact, that very night, he will give Mussolini a private tour of the wreckage. While Klaus von Stauffenberg rushed back to Berlin in hopes that Valkyrie would be implemented, they were going to arrest the SS and take control of the government in a coup, but it all falls to pieces. And the conspirators are lined up. Admiral Canaris would be arrested. Some of them, one guy in particular, a former general, his name is escaping me. He was going to be the next chancellor. He commits suicide, and then the others are shot out in the courtyard in front of the Abwehr offices, to include Klaus von Stauffenberg. He gave his life for the cause. April 9th, 1945. Cardinal, or I did it again. That must be a Freudian slip. I'm not sure why I keep calling him Cardinal. But Admiral Canaris, Hans Oster, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Joey Ox would be tried for treason and found guilty. They would, of course, be executed. The next morning, they are prepared for the gallows. Now, you remember Monsignor Oroche and Father Delp, the Jesuits who helped with the committee? They were already executed by this point. They were killed by piano wire. It's a slower, more painful, agonizing death. They would be tortured endlessly before even that. But this was April 9th, 1945, and one at a time, they'd be taken out to the gallows and hung, and the others were simply waiting their turn. It gets down to the end. Joey Ox is the last guy to be called. He kneels on the prison floor and he prays the Our Father. At the very same moment that Joey Ox begins his procession to the gallows, his daughter, his one and only daughter, to his wife Maria, is making her procession to make her first Holy Communion in Rottenburg, a city that I've been to as a teenager. It's a walled ancient city. It's fantastic. They approach, one to the gallows, the other to the altar rail, almost at the same time. Joey Ox stays at the gallows for 2 hours. He doesn't know what's going on. Neither seemingly does anybody else know why, but they're not killing him yet. Eventually, they take him back to the cell. Still, nobody knows what's up. He thought it was them messing with him, just a psychological game. And so the next day, he fully anticipated being taken back to the gallows, and he was taken back to the gallows the next day. Only again, he would sit there and still they wouldn't hang him. It turns out that one of his old friends, Johann Rattenhuber, his beer buddy, who was the chief bodyguard of Adolf Hitler, put in a phone call to save Joey Ox's life. And this is interesting because it was the will of Adolf Hitler to kill all the conspirators. He wanted them all dead. But Rattenhuber convinced the SS that the war was coming to an end. They had lost. Even though Hitler was still alive, it was all over. They needed someone like Joey Ox, who has a personal relationship with Pope Pius XII, to negotiate on their behalf, to try to save as much as they can before it's all over. That phone call would save Joey Ox's life. His beer buddy, the bodyguard to Adolf Hitler. Can you imagine that? So Joey Ox gets sent back to Dachau, but the invasion, the days are coming to an end. In fact, April 12th, just a few days later, Roosevelt would die, right? April 30th, Adolf Hitler would commit suicide in the bunker. At least so we are told. How many people think he went to Argentina? Raise your hand. It's okay, you can admit it, it's fine. Totally fine, totally okay. So we are told Adolf Hitler commits suicide in the bunker on April the 30th, 1945. His very last official order was to the SS, who had taken all of the special prisoners. They were taken by truck, and they hauled them off at night down into Austria, to the foothills of the Alps, and there they were to execute all of them. Their original intent, the reason why they saved most of them at first, was because they were bargaining chips. But at this point, it was the end. Hitler was about to commit suicide, and now it was about vengeance. In fact, Hitler would want the German people to die with him. They gave him permission. They voted and gave him authority. He felt they should suffer and die right along with him. He had vengeance in his heart. Envy, vitriol. Think about that. And so he commits suicide, and the last order is to kill Joey Ox and these special prisoners. However, because the communication lines by this point were terrible, they were not getting a clear message from Berlin on what to do or what not to do. And there was a German general who was one of these prisoners. Because of his history, because of his reputation, because of his family line, he was allowed to carry a pistol as a prisoner. So the SS were kind of afraid of this guy a little bit, and this guy, Joey Ox, figured this out quick, and he buddies up with the general and stays very close to the general, and the general saves his life on more than one occasion from the drunk SS guards who are gone out of control. Because they were intoxicated at this point so much, some of the prisoners escaped. They were able to flag down the 5th U.S. Army, who comes to the rescue on May the 5th, 1945, in Troll. And that is when the U.S. Army rescues Joey Ox. They will take him back to the Vatican. A Jeep, one of those old, cool Army Jeeps, will drive him into Vatican Square. And he will re-meet Pius XII. And he hadn't seen Pius XII, a few years. And they will spend an afternoon together, sharing stories, talking about old friends that are dead. and what was to lie ahead. I said at the beginning of the film that, or beginning of the conversation, that dark times come when good men do nothing. Peace comes when good men make a radical choice. Pius XII made the choice to cooperate in the assassination attempts and the overthrow of Hitler, and this book documents it incredibly well. By the way, I do not believe the author of this book is Catholic. I don't think this is biased. You read the intro, he heard the Hitler's Pope myth, and he wanted to know for himself, and this book is the result of that investigation. Joey Ox could have saved his own life on many occasions. He never left. He never ran. He always did what he could. He saved as many as possible, and he never was afraid to put his life on the line. He never talked. He went to the gallows alone, never named names. And he even tried to evangelize as many people as he could along the way. Joey Ox would go on. He would serve in the CIA, believe it or not. He would always be a sort of a quasi-agent for the CIA after the war. He would serve in the cabinet and the government. He would also serve as deputy prime minister as well. There's another book. It's a lot harder to read, actually. It's a lot darker, more difficult subject matter about the CIA in particular. It's called Operation Gladio. Read it at your own risk. But one of the side effects, I think it's important to note about this story, is the world that suffers through the trauma of such carnage. 2 wars. It never recovered from the first. The second one was worse than the first. The pendulum had swung too far. And at the end of the war, it became all hands on deck against communism. Could that not have something to do with the state of the world and the church today? Did we sell too high of a price to combat communism? Because many of the members of that spy organization that Joey Ox and Pius XII helped build would continue to collaborate with the CIA and do less than good things. They do nefarious things after the war. In fact, there is a famous memo for the conclave that would elect Pope Paul VI. The CIA apparently was highly favorable of Montini getting the nod, which he would get. So it's a complicated story, is it not? Joey Ox is considered the godfather of the European Union. How much do you love the European Union? Because they swung too far. We have to have Holy Mother Church regulate us, right? Good intentions can go awry, and I think that's one of the stories, one of the lessons we can learn from Joey Ox. But I think it's a story worth telling because you've never heard of him. And he's a man who said, I will lay my life on the line to do what's right, no matter what. And I would argue most of us, myself included, we might not have the courage to make that choice. So, what a story. The stories of sinners and saints. The story of a radical choice. When you choose who you belong to, your whole life must be prioritized accordingly. Amen? So who do you belong to? Thank you.